Despite being blessed with sons named Joshua and Ethan, they grew overly attached to Susan, who filled their heads with lies, causing them to neglect their parents. After Susan, Joshua, and Ethan were kicked out of the house, George passed away suddenly. When I called Joshua to inform him of his father's death, his response was, "Unbelievable, your dad passed away. You handle the funeral, Mom. I don't want to see the face of someone who kicked us out. Yeah, and we're having a great time here, so don't bother us. Just tell the relatives we can't make it because of work or something." I was stunned. A week after the funeral, I received a letter from George addressed to me. It began, "Please read this without our sons finding out." As I read on, I was overwhelmed with emotion. Susan, who had trampled over our family life, and Joshua and Ethan, who refused to attend their father's funeral. I won't let it end like this. My name is Alice, a 54-year-old housewife and full-time employee. I met George at a welcoming party for new employees at our associated companies. Despite being a light drinker, I couldn't refuse the alcohol offered to me and ended up feeling sick from drinking too much. As I shrank into a corner seat, looking for a chance to leave, George noticed me, struck up a conversation, and arranged a taxi for me. Later, I took a day off to thank him at his office. He was surprised to see me during his break. "Traveling all this way just to express gratitude. You're quite thoughtful." Our friendship blossomed into dating, and eventually George and I tied the knot. Both of us, George from a complex upbringing, myself, having lost my parents early, yearned for a close-knit family. We were confident we could find happiness together, but living together unearthed unexpected turmoil, primarily because of George's sister Susan. Before our wedding, I attempted to meet Susan, but our schedules clashed, so our first encounter was on the big day itself. With George's parents deceased, it was a modest affair with close friends and relatives. Susan made quite an impression, dressed in a revealing white gown that seemed more suitable for a nightclub, heavily perfumed and with makeup fit for a stage performer. I tried not to let my discomfort show, but Susan either sensed it or simply didn't take a liking to me from the outset. She didn't extend a greeting and instead ridiculed me. "George, couldn't you find someone more suitable from your workplace? Having such a plain Jane as a sister-in-law is rather embarrassing." "Oh, come on, sis. Maybe she's just right for you, Miss Super Serious." George seemed on the verge of confronting Susan, but a family feud on our wedding day was the last thing either of us wanted. "I'm all right, let's continue with the preparations." I managed a strained smile and guided George away. The awkward introduction left a bitter taste, but I brushed it off, assuming our interactions would remain limited to family gatherings. However, events took an unexpected turn. Following a brief marriage due to her husband's infidelity, Susan surprisingly moved in with us. "My ex is gone, and I want out too. Our parents sold their place when I got hitched, so I can't crash there. Can I crash at George's for a bit?" George seemed visibly exasperated by Susan's call. "Seriously, why not just rent an apartment? You got plenty from the alimony, right? Just let me stay until I find a nice place. I want to take my time finding something good, not just settle for any old place like you guys." "But 20 years old, really? Even with a yard and garage, if it's been reinforced against earthquakes and remodeled, I just wouldn't be interested. Just rent a place by the week." "Joking, you're so serious. I'll be there this weekend. My lease is up." In the end, Susan showed up with her stuff and settled in without asking. The main issue was her obliviousness to the fact that she was being taken care of by us. Susan acted as if it was her own home, causing both George and me considerable distress. Susan would go out every night, sleep in until the afternoon, and then spend the rest of the day lounging on the living room sofa, engrossed in her phone or mindlessly watching TV. This routine continued until she headed out again after dinner. I occasionally took a day off and stayed home, so I became familiar with her daily routine. When I arrived home exhausted in the evening after a full day's work, Susan would ask me in a dissatisfied tone, "Hey, is dinner ready yet? How much longer till it's done?" "In about 30 minutes. "That long? Hurry up, will you?" she would complain impatiently. She didn't hold back on criticizing my cleaning either, commenting, "You're not very good at this," or "You're cutting corners." I shared the cleaning with George, he's tired too. As a wife, you should handle all the household chores. I didn't want to burden George with complaints about Susan and strain their sibling relationship, but he eventually noticed my growing unhappiness. When George asked and I confided in him about Susan's behavior, he was furious. Listen, Susan, don't overstep your bounds. You're a guest here. Oh, I'm just stating facts, Susan replied casually. And start pitching in for household expenses. I'm still reeling from my husband's betrayal. How can I work in this state, and now you want me to pay? You can afford it with the $100,000 alimony you received. You have enough for clothes and drinks. I don't need my brother telling me how to spend my money. Susan's behavior left both George and me exasperated. My vision of a happy married life had turned into a nightmare because of her. George and I had hoped to start a family soon, but perhaps due to the stress caused by Susan, it wasn't happening. We were discussing seeking medical advice when I discovered I was pregnant in our 4th year of marriage. Tears of joy streamed down our faces. George took this opportunity to suggest that Susan find her own place. Susan, we're going to need more space when the baby comes. It might be time for you to find your own place, George asserted. Turning to me, Susan asked, Alice, what are your plans for work? I intend to return after a year of parental leave, I replied. Well, I can take care of the baby, Susan suggested. No, we're planning to use daycare, I countered. Don't you know everywhere around here is full? Susan retorted after checking with the city office and other moms at work, revealing that even non-licensed daycares had wait lists of over a year. See, I told you, she added triumphantly. A few months later, as my belly began to show, Susan offered, I'll take care of the baby until you find a daycare spot. I owe you, and I'll do it for free. Quitting your job would be tough on your finances. After discussing it, George and I reluctantly agreed to let Susan help. I was apprehensive, but Susan surprised us by taking excellent care of our newborn Joshua. She researched childcare online, handled his meals and daily needs, and even took him to parks and community centers. She was dedicated to Joshua, evident from his strong bond with her. When our second son, Ethan, arrived 2 years later, Susan's commitment didn't waver. With both George and I busy with work, we were grateful for her invaluable help with the children. But as the boys grew older, they began to openly distance themselves from us. Joshua, Ethan, would you like to go to the amusement park at the end of the month? No, we're going with Susan. What about going out for a barbecue for Ethan's birthday? You mentioned wanting that. Susan already took us to a fancy barbecue place for my birthday. We're going to a high-end sushi restaurant this time. Can't wait. George and I felt torn seeing our sons so enthusiastic about spending time with Susan. Even after Joshua and Ethan started elementary school, we appreciated Susan for being there for them on our workdays. On weekends, when George and I were home, Joshua and Ethan remained attached to Susan. They didn't initiate conversations with us and acted as if our presence didn't matter, spending their time playing games and going out with her. The situation worsened as Joshua grew older. He began showing his displeasure openly, ignoring us or even clicking his tongue when we tried to talk to him. Once, Joshua started eating while absorbed in his phone, and when I scolded him, he glared and snapped. Shut up, old lady. I was momentarily stunned. Man, life would be so much better if Susan was our mom. She always gives us money and takes us places. Yeah, seriously. Having parents like ours is a total drag. I was taken aback by their words but managed to keep my composure as I replied, Susan doesn't work despite being healthy, doesn't contribute financially, and lives off her ex-husband's alimony. So what? That's a lifestyle to aspire to, Joshua retorted dreamily. But Susan raised us properly. It's strange to complain about her, I interjected. Yeah, you guys didn't really want kids, did you? Ethan chimed in. What? That's not true. Your dad and I always wanted kids. Susan offered to help until we found childcare. I protested desperately. Joshua smirked at my emotional response. You're always nagging us, telling us to do homework, saying we play too many games. Yeah, Susan understands. She says it's okay to skip homework and even stays up late playing games with us, Ethan added. Frustrated, I snapped back. Susan has no responsibility for your future. Your dad and I say these things because we care about you, even if it means you resent us. Yeah, right. You're just jealous because we're closer to Susan. Maybe you shouldn't have let her take care of us. Joshua shot back callously. I felt tears welling up, and when I looked up, I saw George standing in the doorway, his fists trembling with suppressed anger. Who do you think you're talking to? George's voice cut through the boys' mocking laughter. Oh, hey Dad. Working late again today. Must be tough, Joshua replied casually. Yeah, for such a measly salary, Ethan chimed in with a smirk. The boys chuckled mockingly, leaving George momentarily speechless. Finally, you talk to us, and it's to mock your parents. Susan's voice echoed from the hallway as she descended the stairs into the kitchen. She shrugged in annoyance. George, stop making a scene. Reacting to kids like this is so immature. It's because you spoil them that they're like this. George exploded, his frustration palpable. I've had enough. Get out now. What? I've been nothing but good to my nephews. And this is the thanks I get. Susan retorted, her tone indignant. If you're staying, then contribute financially, George demanded firmly. Susan huffed in defiance. Fine, I'll leave. Are you happy now? What? Susan, you're really leaving. Joshua and Ethan couldn't believe their ears. Yeah, take care, she smiled at Joshua and Ethan as they escorted her to the gate, then departed. But by then, the rift between us and our sons had grown too wide to bridge. As teenagers, Joshua and Ethan became increasingly rebellious. Joshua quit his job a month after graduating high school, and 2 years later, Ethan followed suit, quitting his job after just a few days. They boasted about starting a business together and dabbled in shady dealings, squandering money from odd jobs in a single night. After a heated argument, George kicked them out of the house. Come back when you've got a job, he told them sternly. We're never coming back to this place, Joshua shot back defiantly. And so Susan, who had stirred up turmoil in our family, along with the sons she had influenced, Joshua and Ethan, left. It was just my husband and me once again. I worried about how Joshua and Ethan were faring, but with the three of them gone, the chaotic atmosphere lifted, and I felt a sense of relief. At the end of that year, as I was preparing to leave work and head home, I received a call from one of George's colleagues. Are you Alice? George collapsed at work. What? He's currently receiving treatment in the ICU at the city hospital. I understand. I'll go there right away. Feeling like I was on the edge of panic, I commanded myself to stay calm and drove swiftly to the hospital. After identifying myself at the ICU reception, I waited anxiously in the hallway until the automatic doors slid open. A man in a white coat, likely a doctor, approached. When he looked at me, his eyes dropped to the floor. We did everything we could, but I'm sorry. I stood there, stunned and unable to speak, overwhelmed by the sudden shock. This morning, I had bid farewell to George as he left for work, just like any other day. Keep your schedule open for our anniversary next month. Sure, the usual restaurant. I've got a surprise planned this year. Same place, though. I never imagined that such a routine conversation would be our last. The world around me seemed to fade into shades of gray. Am I the only one left now? I questioned the meaning of it all, haunted by ominous thoughts. Despite my inner turmoil, I decided to reach out to everyone, Joshua, Fate, and Susan, and inform them of George's passing. I left voicemails and sent messages, needing them to know. That night, amidst cheerful music and chatter in the background of Joshua's call, it was clear he was dining at a restaurant. Joshua, your father has, I began, my voice trembling with emotion. Joshua interrupted with a half laugh, the funeral and all that, Mom, I'll leave it to you. Honestly, after how he treated us, I don't even want to see his face. We're having a good time here, so don't bother us. Oh my, George really made himself unpopular, didn't he? Susan's voice chimed in, laughter evident in her tone. Just tell everyone we couldn't make it because of work. Give her regards. Wait a moment. I stood there, stunned, clutching the phone. Were these really George's sister and sons? Feeling hollow, I knew I had to move forward with the funeral arrangements. I reached out to George's relatives in the funeral home we usually worked with, organizing a family service. The sudden farewell felt surreal. I couldn't shed a tear during the funeral. But as daily life resumed, the stark reality of George's absence hit me repeatedly. While preparing meals, setting up to watch our favorite TV show, making coffee, I would instinctively do things for two, only to realize George was no longer there, and the tears would flow uncontrollably. A week after George passed, while watering the garden, I saw the mailman's car pull up. Taking the mail inside, I noticed an envelope addressed to me that stood out. The distinct handwriting was unmistakably George's. With a rush of emotion, I opened it. First, it explained why I was receiving this letter. I asked an old friend to send this in case something happened to me. Then, after a heartfelt expression of gratitude for our years together, one line caught my eye. Please read this without our sons finding out. My heart swelled as I continued reading. Tears welled up as I realized how deeply George understood my concerns for our children. Wiping my eyes, I made a decision. I had to honor George's sentiments. Susan, who had disrupted our family so callously, and Joshua and Ethan, who had refused to attend their own father's funeral. This couldn't be the end. I was determined to change things. Immediately following George's instructions in his letter, I headed to the bank using the address he had provided. Nervously, I entered the safety deposit box room adjacent to the ATMs. Following the steps meticulously, I inserted the card into the slot, entered the PIN, and watched as a section of the table slid open, revealing George's rented safety deposit box. Using the key from the letter, I unlocked the box and confirmed that everything George had mentioned was indeed inside. Carefully placing the items in my bag, I left the bank. Later, I gathered Susan, Joshua, and Ethan at my home. I want to share George's inheritance with everyone who was important to him, I announced. They eagerly accepted my invitation, displaying no hesitation. The word shameless seemed apt, skipping their father's funeral yet eagerly anticipating his inheritance. Susan, unable to wait while I prepared tea, blurted out her thoughts. So George, the miser, had an inheritance, huh? Maybe he had hidden assets. Being stingy might have its benefits. I wonder if he stashed away his inheritance in some account. Anyway, I'm excited, she smirked, glancing at me. You did the right thing by letting your dear sister-in-law in on this. Well, Mom, perhaps Susan has a point. Let's cut to the chase. Is Dad's inheritance jewelry? Maybe gold bars, Joshua interjected eagerly while Ethan and Susan fidgeted with anticipation. Before we get to that, please listen to this, I said calmly, placing an IC recorder and George's cell phone on the dining table. Their puzzled expressions told me they didn't understand why these were there. Dad's cell phone, and what's this, an IC recorder? Ethan asked, his brows furrowing in confusion. Yeah, it's like those ones they use to catch people cheating. Joshua chimed in with a crude laugh. His expression quickly sobered as I pressed play on the phone. Joshua's voice filled the room, speaking cheerfully to a friend over the phone. Hey, remember that old lady who hangs around her house, Susan? She thinks she's got me wrapped around her finger, calls me Joshua dear. It's disgusting, but if you flatter her, she'll throw money your way. There's a use for fools and old ladies. As Joshua's words sank in, Susan's face contorted with anger. I paused the recording, and Susan demanded in a furious tone, Joshua, what is this? I don't know, maybe it's someone else. Did Dad set this up? Joshua attempted to feign ignorance, but Susan wasn't buying it. George couldn't even operate his phone properly, let alone set up something like this. Oh, I just remembered I have to go do something, Ethan interjected, attempting to slip away unnoticed. Quickly, I started the second recording. How much did Susan give you this time? $22,000. Damn, I only got $15,000. What did you do? Bought her a bouquet of roses and a designer bag for her birthday, thinking of giving her a knockoff next time, she won't even notice. Smart move, Joshua and Ethan chuckled together. She lives for the attention and gifts from men. Even pushing 60, she insists she's still young, falling for every flattering word from guys at the bar and spending a fortune on them. She's an easy mark. Utterly naive, and that bleach blonde hair, it's laughable. She even dreams of marrying a young Korean pop star despite the age gap. Ridiculous, even as a joke. Amid Joshua and Ethan's laughter, the recording abruptly stopped. Ethan, wearing a strained smile, muttered defensively, when did Dad record this? And then to play it for Mom after he's gone, that's just cruel. Yeah, pretending to be the good guy, but those are the ones you gotta watch, added Joshua, continuing to sling insults about George, which enraged me. As I prepared to respond, Susan cut in angrily, How dare you mock the people who raised you since you were little? Don't mess with me. That's what's so irritating about you, Ethan shot back, always acting like we owe you something. Exactly, it's hollow coming from you, Joshua and Ethan chuckled together, watching Susan's face turn red with fury. Now it's your turn, Susan. Having your favorite bar to hang out in, that must be nice, I interjected, reaching for the IC recorder. Susan's expression tensed visibly. Without hesitation, I pressed play. First came lively music and clinking glasses, followed by a man and woman chatting. Then Susan's voice, high-pitched and overlaid with background noise, filled the room. That's right, I've had my nephews wrapped around my finger since they were little, filling their heads with all sorts of nonsense about their parents. Kids are so easy to manipulate. Susan's voice echoed through the recording. Oh, Susan, you're quite cunning, praised the man. I'm single. I need them to take care of me in my old age. Look at my nephew, aren't they handsome? Susan continued. They do look like models or pop stars. Impressed, the host chimed in. I dream of my nephews feeding me, taking me on amusement park dates, even changing my diapers in the future, Susan concluded. As the playback ended, I fixed my gaze on Susan. Joshua and Ethan stared at her intensely, waiting for her response. So, both my brother and his wife had such sinister hobbies, secretly recording these things. Susan finally said, trying to deflect. You were out gallivanting so much. I heard from relatives and got curious. Besides, your ex-husband's alimony should have dried up after 20 years, yet you've remained unemployed. So, I hired a private investigator to investigate your past, I explained calmly. And this is what was uncovered. Susan, you truly are something, I added. This isn't funny at all, you creepy old lady. What do you think of us? Joshua asked, his voice filled with disdain. As the sons cringed and wrapped their arms around themselves, Susan's eyes narrowed in anger. Shut up. I did indeed spoil you, spending my time and money on you. What's wrong with expecting something in return? Spending money? Oh, like this? I said, spreading the bank book open on the table, catching Joshua and Ethan's eyes gleaming with interest. Oh, so this is finally the inheritance? Joshua and Ethan asked eagerly. Well, sort of, I replied with a meaningful look at Susan, who visibly began to sweat. Her eyes darted around, searching for an escape. Turning to Joshua and Ethan, I continued, remember what I told you before? George had cut ties with his father before we got married. Yeah, I remember, Joshua nodded. Our grandfather, Dad's father, didn't work seriously despite being wealthy, relied on the family fortune, and racked up huge debts. That's right, George's mother worked herself to death paying off those debts. Isn't that true, Susan? I directed the question at her. Yes, I also cut ties with him after becoming an adult, although I did attend his funeral, Susan confirmed. After that, George received an inheritance from wealthy relatives, kept it secret, and deposited it in an account for you three. What? We never heard anything about this. Why didn't he tell us if there was money? Ethan questioned, his disbelief evident. He planned to distribute the inheritance once you started taking life seriously. But before that could happen, someone used it without permission. Joshua and Ethan turned to Susan simultaneously. No way. Yes, Susan took George's bank book and seal without permission while he was alive and withdrew money, I revealed. The two brothers looked at the bank book in shock. $200,000 down to $10 in just a year. What did you spend it on? Joshua demanded, his voice tinged with anger. Well, this guy convinced me there was a great investment opportunity. I thought I could double it and pay it back. It was just a loan, Susan explained defensively, squirming under their accusing glares. Don't joke. That was supposed to be our money. Joshua erupted, his voice thick with betrayal and anger. Just $200,000 and you're making a fuss. Considering the effort I put into raising you, you should be giving it to me for free, Susan retorted defiantly, her tone dripping with entitlement. Joshua and Ethan's faces flushed with rage, their fists clenched tightly. But that's not all, Susan. I sighed heavily, placing Joshua and Ethan's bank books on the table. You both started working right after high school, so the college funds were left untouched. I was going to give it to you once you started taking life seriously, but even that was tampered with. As they saw only minimal amounts remaining in their accounts, Joshua ripped at his hair in frustration while Ethan fought back tears. Damn it, Susan. What you've done is criminal. Yeah, we'll sue you, Ethan added vehemently. Don't be ridiculous. It's called family affairs, not theft when committed by relatives, Susan scoffed, crossing her arms smugly. I'll repay it someday. Perhaps in another life. No, you can be held accountable for this. That's why I contacted the authorities earlier, I stated calmly, watching as Susan's eyes widened in shock. What? Indeed, Family members living together aren't exempt from legal consequences, which is why George planned to report you before he passed away. Dumbfounded, Susan stared at me in disbelief. You betrayed your husband's sister. Yes, that's exactly what happened, I affirmed firmly. Unbelievable. After everything I've done for you, how ungrateful, Susan retorted, shaking her head in disbelief. Who's ungrateful here? I shot back, my voice rising sharply, cutting through the tension in the room. I fixed Susan with a steely gaze, my anger boiling over. Because of you, our family is in ruins, it's beyond repair. What do you intend to do about it? You're overreacting, Susan shrugged dismissively. I should have never trusted you and kicked you out sooner. Turning to Joshua and Ethan, she flashed a malevolent smile. I wanted to be a mother figure, you know? Since I couldn't become one, I thought I'd take your mom away from you too, out of spite. Joshua and Ethan exchanged uneasy glances, visibly shaken. Are you even sane? Just stay away from us for good, Joshua replied sternly. That's a problem. I came here today to borrow some money from you, Susan smirked. Family should help each other out in times of need, right? Yeah, sure, Mom, Ethan chimed in half-heartedly. Suddenly, their demeanor shifted from defiance to desperation. Actually, we're broke too. Got fired for talking back at work, just for taking a small break. They're so unfair, Joshua and Ethan complained bitterly in unison. A headache started to throb behind my temples. You got fired for a reason. What? Why? Ethan protested. Yeah, we got evicted from our apartment, Joshua added nonchalantly. Couldn't keep up with the rent, so we'll crash here for a bit. Can you cover our debts too? Once we're debt-free, we promise to get serious about finding work. Can't you lend us around $40,000? You're still working, right? Their audacious request ignited a surge of anger within me. Don't be ridiculous. I have nothing to lend to ungrateful sons who skip their own father's funeral, I retorted vehemently, refusing to entertain their demands. Please, Mom, if you keep this up, I'll consider reporting you to the police too, Joshua threatened, his voice tinged with desperation. Don't ever set foot in this house again, I shouted, my voice trembling with anger and frustration. Just then, the wail of a police siren pierced the tense atmosphere, and Susan, attempting to flee, collided with the arriving officers at the front door. Quietly, she was led away by the police, her escape cut short. Damn, are we in trouble too? Let's just get out of here for now, Joshua and Ethan muttered to each other, casting a last glance at me before begrudgingly abandoning their pursuit of money and leaving. In the aftermath, Joshua and Ethan seemed to have finally severed their emotional ties to Susan upon realizing that the funds they had been receiving, including allowances, originated from George's estate and their own savings. I don't want to end up like them, they resolved, appearing to commit to taking their careers seriously. However, their habits of laziness persisted, and they sporadically reached out to me. Mom, I'm in a bind at the bar. Can you lend me some cash? I blew everything on horse races. Can you spot me $100,000? Frustrated by their irresponsibility, I eventually blocked their calls and messages. They attempted to solicit funds from other family members but were met with cold rejection and criticism for their absence at their father's funeral, further isolating themselves. Driven by mounting debts owed to dubious creditors, Joshua and Ethan finally woke up to the harsh reality and began earnestly pursuing employment. Yet their reckless past had caught up with them. They were banned from their former haunts, shunned even at their favored drinking establishments. We've lost all the fun in our lives, Joshua and Ethan lamented. Susan, as a first-time offender, paid a fine and was released promptly. However, the repercussions were severe. She was soon dumped by her boyfriend. Moreover, after repaying the embezzled funds from George's, Joshua's, and Ethan's accounts, she found herself buried under a mountain of debt. Susan now works tirelessly from early morning till late at night, visibly drained and worn out. What I chose not to disclose to Susan and my sons was that George had left another item in the safe, a large pink diamond necklace, a cherished heirloom passed down from his mother. As detailed in his letter, it was meant as a gift for our 30th wedding anniversary next year. Fearful it might be discovered and sold by Susan or my sons, George had kept it safely locked away. Upon appraisal, it stunned me to learn it was valued at $240,000. Of course, selling it was out of the question. It remains a precious memento from George. Despite my yearning for a close-knit family, Things didn't reconcile with my sons, and I lost my husband as well. Yet George's memory continues to reside warmly in my heart. Looking ahead, I aim to remain resilient, cherishing the cherished memories George left behind.